For the safety of listeners at home, following guidelines specified by the MPAA for film as a baseline, the following reading will be rated PG for scenes of fantasy violence and some dark imagery. The text read comes from a slightly earlier version of the novel. As such, wording may be different in certain places compared to the final published text. However, the author has endeavored to make sure that the reading and the novel are as close as possible. The Knight and the Unicorn. Chapter 4. Soren's Warnings. Despite his reservations about being in the middle of the Enchantress's wood, Tristan slept deeply and dreamlessly through the night. The night passed without him being disturbed and without incident. Exhaustion and coming off the adrenaline high had taken their toll. Nothing short of a loud crashing noise would have woken him up. Far from being confused like his first time, Tristan woke up almost lazily the next morning. He opened one eye first, then another, and slowly surveyed the meadow. Serena was not too far away, the unicorn's attention going between tending to the still unconscious Rosalind and grazing on the surrounding grasses and berries, and he was still in his armor from the previous night, lying in the hollow he had carved out for himself. Next to him was a pile of herbs and berries, which he ate with the rest of the bread that was in his pack. He also had some water left in his canteen, and he drank deeply from it. He had finished up his canteen and was refilling it at the stream when Serena noticed he was awake and trotted over to him. She flung her head back to get a strand of her mane out of her face and spoke gently as though afraid of startling him. "How are you feeling?" "Certainly better than yesterday," Tristan replied graciously as he stood up and stretched. "Your hospitality is welcomed, both for me and for Rosalind." He looked over to the sleeping woman and his voice became filled with concern. "How is she? Is she doing better today after giving her the berries?" "She is slowly recovering," Serena replied. "She will live, but there is more we must do before then." She gave his armor another strange look. "We did not have much time for talk yesterday, but might I ask where you found your armor?" Tristan was once again afraid of mentioning Soren to Serena and spoke guardedly. "As I said before, I found it lying on the side of the road. I was hiding from something I thought was pursuing me, and it was in a hollow under a rock. Perhaps someone not so lucky as I left it behind." Serena nodded. "If you do not mind, let me check it for enchantment," she said. "I am at least somewhat afraid the enchantress might have left it around for you to pick up, only for it to be cursed." Tristan nodded. The explanation seemed reasonable to him, and he began to take the armor off. "No, you can leave it on," Serena said. "Just let me tap my horn to it and check it for magic." Tristan refitted the armor and nodded, though secretly he was afraid. What if Serena noticed the enchantment to maintain form on it and thought it was bad? What if Soren was lying and Serena called it a curse? What would happen then? He nearly removed the armor anyways, but Serena had already crossed over to him. Serena brought her horn down and gently tapped the armor on Tristan's shoulder, her horn sparkling as she did so. She moved to the gloves, leggings, and boots in turn, gently tapping each and emitting the sparkles as she did so. Tristan felt a gentle tingle go throughout his body where Serena tapped the armor, but every time it felt as though the armor was drawing it out, and it was gone as soon as Serena's horn moved away. "It helped me to retrieve the berries," Tristan said, hoping to keep Serena from finding anything unusual about it. "If I had not been wearing it, the snake guarding the berry bush would have crushed me." Serena finished her inspection of the boots. "You would do well to keep it then," she said approvingly. "There will be more dangers ahead, and as I cannot find a curse on these items, may they lend you their aid." Tristan sighed with relief. "Sounds good to me. So, what is my next task?" "Are you so quick to leave?" Serena asked almost sadly. She looked away from Tristan for but a moment before speaking again. "I was hoping," she began, but trailed off with a sigh. For a moment Tristan wondered whether or not the unicorn was lonely. Certainly it wasn't fair that such a beautiful creature be trapped in these woods with no one to talk to, and it certainly didn't help that the first two humans to come in a long while had one sick and the other so driven he barely focused on her. Tristan felt a mild pang of sadness himself as he contemplated the unicorn's own plight. When this was all over, he considered it would be a good idea to come back and visit as a way of showing their thanks. Serena's voice became less melancholy as she turned back to Tristan. "But never mind, Mia. I suppose you are eager to help me with Rosalind, and I desire her return too. For you, I will waste no time. You know of the ruins on the mountain top, yes?" "Yes," Tristan said. As soon as Serena had mentioned the mountains, Tristan pushed aside his musings and focused on the task at hand. "They are a holy place, and many people used to go there as a form of pilgrimage before these woods became tainted by magic." Serena nodded, pleased at Tristan's knowledge. The entrance is here in these woods, and there is more than just ruins up there. At the very summit is a spring, and the waters there are said to be blessed with power. The water will increase my magic to ward against curses, as well as purify Rosalind of any other enchantments. So I am to bring 2 vials of this water, much like the berries, Tristan said, processing the information. Of course, I will do as you say. Very good. Serena used her magic to bring out 2 more of the vials from the hollow and gave them to Tristan. Put these in your bag and use them to hold the water from the spring. You may also be interested in using one of them to drink first, as it will provide an extra barrier from the enchantress's magic should you come across her. Then let us both pray that does not happen. Let us indeed, Tristan said, as he took the vials and pocketed them. I should not like to be cut off from this so soon, not when Rosalind's recovery is almost within sight, and I have much to thank you for. Take heart, dear Tristan, Serena said, her voice encouraging and even slightly appreciative. Remember, I am behind you. I believe in you, and I have hope in you. Tristan smiled. I will remember, Serena. The unicorn showed Tristan another path out of the clearing, off towards the mountain, and he headed off towards the sacred peak to start his second task. The forests were silent as ever as Tristan made his way to the base of the mountain. The birds stopped singing, and he couldn't even hear the stream after a while. The only sounds that came to him were the clinking of his armor and his footsteps pounding the dirt. Very gradually the ground began to rise. Tristan looked up and soon found himself inside the shadow of the mountain looming overhead. A sort of awe came upon him as he drew closer and closer, realizing just how tall it was and might have been chosen as a holy ground. It felt as though it ascended into the heavens, the sun behind it creating a halo effect around the mountain's peak. If only he could bring her to the top. Tristan pushed those thoughts out of his mind and wondered about a way to climb the mountain. He did not have to worry. The path approached the base of a grey and brown rocky cliff, only to turn sharply to the right and begin to gradually ascend, hugging the mountainside as it climbed slowly upwards. Tristan shrugged his shoulders, took a drink from his canteen, and started up the path. At first the path seemed almost an extension of the forest themselves, surrounded by trees and only patches of sunlight coming through. But the trees soon became lighter and lighter until only a few oaks and aspens surrounded the trail. Very soon there were no trees at all, and for the first time in what felt like a long while, Tristan came into the sunlight. It was astonishingly warm. The sunlight shone down on him and filled him with warmth that surpassed even that of the gentle feeling of the meadow. The light also felt like it reinvigorated him, concentrating on him and lighting a fire within that was partly awe and partly relief. A weight felt like it had been lifted from his shoulders as he scanned over the tops of the trees for the first time in 2 days. The air was clear, and he took a deep breath and found himself feeling lighter than ever. A switchback came, and then Tristan was heading back around the mountain in the direction of the meadow. But when Tristan looked over from the trail, he could not see the meadow anywhere around, even though the only obstruction within it was the giant oak tree. And Tristan knew that didn't cover the whole meadow. Even farther off was the city of Elendria, over the wide expanse of forest and barely a speck on the plains beyond. Tristan realized for the first time that he had also disappeared for 2 days, and he began to think himself rather foolish. Even with Serena offering him a cure for Rosalind, he began to feel homesick and longed to tell his mother and father he was okay. But something about the forest felt like it would suppress his voice even above the tops of the trees, and he did not even try to shout to them over the woods. There came the sound of hoofsteps coming down the path from the top of the mountain. Tristan whirled around only to find the dark unicorn coming down towards him. His coat was a deep dark grey that was soft like that of fine silk. The hooves and mane were dark blue like that of a calm deep ocean, and the horn glinted like starlight. He came up to Tristan and stopped a few feet away with an unmistakable bow. Tristan gave a half bow in return. "We meet again, Soren," he said. Soren nodded approvingly and looked up and down at Tristan's suit of armor. "Well met, Tristan. I see you decided to take my advice." "With hesitation," Tristan replied slowly, "but your gift has served me well. Have you come to bring me advice again?" "My advice remains the same if your quest does," the dark unicorn said. "So tell me, what are you here for? What brings you to this holy mountain top?" "I am here to bring my beloved a vial of water from the spring at the top of the mountain," Tristan replied. "I have the vial in my pocket, and I was told I could drink the waters to guard the enchantress's magic." Soren surveyed him and looked at him up and down. "Indeed it shall," he said. "The enchantress cannot step on this mountain, nor even come to its base. But drink in with caution, for holy water is only good if the heart of the soul and conscience is clear." Tristan thought about this for a bit. "Then that means you cannot be one of the enchantress's familiars," he said. "You have stepped on holy ground as I am doing, and you are not harmed by it." Soren bowed again. "All is not lost, it seems," he said proudly. "Come with me. We have much to talk over, and finally a bit of time to do it in. Tristan followed him, and they continued walking up the mountain. My kind can perceive auras, the dark unicorn said as they continued, though not the whole truth. I sense your conscience is clear, even though your soul is clouded. The holy water you seek will be necessary indeed. My soul clouded? Tristan brought a hand up and clutched at his heart. Does this mean I can't touch the water if I've sinned? No, the dark unicorn said gently. It means you are in need of it. Go up with a repentant soul, and the water shall cleanse. Come down with a cleansed soul, and so too will your beloved notice your change. But take down 2 vials with you, one for your beloved, and one to give to whom you shall choose. Tristan thought about this for a very long time. You speak in riddles once again. So let me ask you a question, and I hope you shall answer me plainly. The enchantress cannot step on the mountain, but can she drink the water? This particular hallowed water is a double-edged sword, Soren replied. If it will make you stronger, then it will also make her stronger. Strength of one's soul does not necessarily mean it is good. It simply means it is not at full potential. Judgment comes later. The last comment caught Tristan off guard. He raised an eyebrow at Soren in confusion. Why do you always speak in riddles? To make you think, Soren stated matter-of-factually. If you can glean even a bit of information from what clues I give you, then you are at least still somewhat aware of the danger you are in. And that is even if I do not directly state it, and even if you do not directly think it yourself. It will still lie within your subconscious. But to reveal more risks your life as well as Rosalind's, and as close as you are to possibly succeeding where all others have failed, I shall not risk one bit more. Tristan stopped walking and grunted as though he had been hit with a blow to the gut. Soren also stopped a few paces beyond him and turned around and watched him. I should have brought Rosalind here, Tristan said. This mountain would be safer than the meadow. I must repeat the words I said the last time we met. Your impulse could be either your salvation or your destruction, Soren said. Perhaps it is your salvation now, but beware of the choice that could bring you to destruction. Heh, more riddles, Tristan chuckled, though without mirth. No meeting with you has been in fair weather. Stormy weather is when good advice is most needed, Soren said. It is also when warnings are the most useful. Just be aware of each situation, and listen to your gut to make sure it's leading you in the right direction. They came to another switchback. The air up here was brisk and cold despite the sun shining down on him. Tristan's armor felt warmer than the surroundings, but he still shivered when a cold breeze blew through the gaps. Tristan made to continue up the mountain, but the dark unicorn stopped a few paces behind him and would not go with him. This is where I leave you, Soren said. I cannot interfere with your task, but I notice you have left your walking stick behind. Tristan looked down at his side to discover he had indeed left the walking stick by where he had slept in the meadow, and had forgotten to take it with him when he left that morning. So I have, he commented. He looked back to the unicorn and stared at him intently, waiting for him to go on. Then if you still trust me, let me give you another piece of equipment. Once you reach the ruins at a summit, immediately go right. There in a chest you will find a sword and a shield. Use them to offer defense to those who need defending the most. Tristan nodded. Thank you, and I hope we meet again. I should not doubt it, Soren said. You have a long way to go yet, and so do I. Our paths shall cross again someday. With that, the dark unicorn turned around and trotted back down the mountain. Tristan watched him go until he was out of sight, then turned around himself and resumed his climb up the mountain. A gust of cold wind blew through the cracks in his armor, and he longed for the meadow with Serena and Rosalind. He shivered in his armor, but his resolve returned, and he continued the hike undaunted. Tristan's second meeting with the dark unicorn brought answers, but certainly more questions. Soren was definitely not familiar that Serena had spoken of, but seemed to imply that Tristan needed help himself. There were the items that Soren was pointing him towards, but even with armor and the upcoming sword and shield, the dark unicorn still gave him warnings. If Tristan did not know better, he would have almost assumed the unicorn gave the assumption that Tristan was being poisoned himself. At first, the idea seemed ridiculous. Why would he be poisoned? His base was the only clear part of the forest. Rosalind was in the care of Serena, and the lighter unicorn had given him instructions that were clearly helping him heal her and restore Serena's power over the enchantress. As he walked further, however, they began to take a dark meaning. He came back to Serena's meadow as a base, but what if the woods themselves were the problem? What if the magic rested there that was probably beginning to seep into what Serena was desperately trying to make hallowed ground? If that was true, then Soren was right. Perhaps merely being in the presence of the enchantress's magic, even if he had not explicitly seen her himself, was clouding Tristan's mind. He thought back to the encounter with the snake. No, there was nothing the snake said that would cause Tristan to be in danger, but certainly a snake that size could not exist in a forest like this without some aid. Perhaps it too had been tainted by the enchantress's magic. And if that was true, that may have affected his experiences in the meadow. The phantom dreams and visions of Rosalind's capture could have been her taunting him. The exhaustion he felt upon his return could be the strain of fighting against the powers that wanted to hold him at bay. The clean water from the river and the herbs and berries that Serena gave him could have been magically imbued by the unicorn to fight off those effects. But they were already running low, and their effects would almost be gone by the time he returned to the meadow once again. If that was the case, Tristan did not have much time. He took a deep breath of the mountain air and found it cool and invigorating. He needed that water as much as for Serena as he did for Rosalind. He steeled himself once more and broke up into a run up the mountainside. Another curve, and suddenly the path began to go straight up the side of the mountain. Tristan began to climb a large set of stairs until he passed underneath a large stone archway with faded lettering. Behind the archway stood the ruins of what looked like an old monastery, its shape almost reminding him of the church in Lindria where he had talked with Friar Jacobs. It was here that the spring should be located, and Tristan prepared the 2 vials. Tristan was so consumed in his thoughts that he nearly passed by the place where Soren had told him the sword and shield could be found. He backtracked to the archway and, reorienting himself as to the dark unicorn's directions, turned left into the ruins of a small house. It seemed to be still put together, with a kitchen, bedroom, and what might have been a small library. The furniture inside was old and rotting, and there were cobwebs all along the walls. It might have been the house of the parson or the head priest. It was small enough and sparse enough that one corner of the house may have been reserved for prayer by its emptiness. The thought of Friar Jacobs and the house's previous occupant stirred more feelings in Tristan, but the subject of those feelings made him uncomfortable and colder even than the wind howling along the mountain top. Tristan looked around in the house. He noticed the layout. There was the library he had talked with Friar Jacobs in. There was the kitchen where the friar had made him tea. And there was the table where Friar had told him about the enchantress. The priest's words echoed in his mind. So long as you do these things, you will be protected from whatever magic she shall cast upon you. But as our book says, do not stray to the left or to the right. But there was something before that. Something that was faded, but seemed like it should have been more important. Something that Tristan had clearly forgotten to do. Your impulse could be either your salvation or your destruction. Now it was Soren's words echoing in his brain. They rattled around and clanged around until it felt like they would consume him. And at that moment Tristan realized what the unicorn had meant. Even before he had entered his place, his impulse had weakened him. If he had slowed down and remembered what the friar had said before entering the woods, maybe his mind wouldn't be so clouded as it was now. Maybe he would already be back with Rosalind and his task complete. Tristan walked into the bedroom. There was a chest with a blue and silver insignia on it. Tristan went over and opened the chest. Inside was a sword with a blade that was as long as his arm, with a gold-colored handle and a trio of sapphires embedded in it. The shield appeared to be made of the same metal as his armor, with the same color scheme, and the faint outline of a horse in silver. Tristan picked up the shield and put it over his back, finding it light and easy to wield. He then picked up the sword and examined it closely. It was light yet tough steel that shone with a pale light, and seemed clean as the day it was forged. He examined the blade, looking for runes or other telltale signs of its maker, but he could find none. Something caught his eye in the reflection of the steel. It was his own face, and he did not like the sight of it at all. In fact, he barely recognized himself. His hair was wild and untamed and filled with dirt and leaves. His clothes were becoming torn, and his face and arms showed signs of multiple scratches. He was starting to grow blonde hair around his face and cheeks that almost clashed with the darker hair on his forehead. His eyes were sunken in and baggy as though he had not slept in a long time, and his eyes themselves were strange to him. One was a bluish green, while the other had faint tinges of violet. Tristan rubbed his eyes and shook his hair. There were neither dirt nor leaves in his short hair, and his eyes were fine. He looked back at the sword and found it was quite as normal as it ever was. No messy hair, no facial hair, slight bags but not sunken eyes, and they certainly weren't mismatched. O brave knight, O sweet knight, wherever thou art, so no foe is too large for the strength of thy heart. Serena's voice seemed to echo in his brain, and the memory of the words emboldened and strengthened Tristan. No, the monster he saw in the sword was not him. Perhaps it was what he could be if he stayed here too long, but it certainly wasn't who he truly was. Maybe Soren was right and he had some personal demons, but all the better he was in this place, to be cleansed of it and return to Serena and Rosalind. He would overcome this, just as Serena had said he would. And if Serena believed he could do it, and if Rosalind required that he would do it, then it would be done, no question about it. It took a long while for Tristan to recover from the sight of the vision. He did not know its origin, but it certainly wouldn't do for him to stay in this place. and easy to get back to Serena in the meadow. He gathered up the sword and placed the shield on his back before leaving the small house, continuing up the mountain. Despite the dilapidated and uncared-for look of the ruin of the old monastery was very much surprisingly intact. A majority of the buildings still had very well-defined rooms that contained some of their defining features. A blackboard and rows of worn desks were in possible teaching areas. Large shelves marked libraries with separate studies for quiet research. A large room with many worn and broken tables might have been a meeting hall or a communal dining room. At the center of this monastery was the large church, perhaps double the size of the one of Alindria, with high vaulted ceilings and dusty and broken stained glass windows. It also appeared to be on the highest point of the mountain. The road through the other buildings seemed to wind around to that one point, and so Tristan figured he'd better go there if he was to find the spring. He picked his way around to the entrance, oddly not directly aligned with the entrance to the monastery compound, and entered inside. Most of the interior of the church even seemed intact. Rotting wood pews could still be found, though they almost crumbled at Tristan's touch. An old organ at one side of the church had rusted brass pipes and likely could not be played, but maintained a grand centerpiece. Some of the old communion and altar pieces could still be seen, though any sign of the divine seemed to have been stripped from the place. The poor church seemed to be torn in places, but the main structure remained strong against the wind and snow that could be heard gently swirling around outside. "Rather much like myself lately," Tristan said to himself, a small grin on his face. He wasn't exactly confident, but he wasn't beaten down yet either. The sword and shield were certainly helpful. While no one was around, at least Tristan now had a way of defending himself that was much more appropriate for the danger he seemed to be getting himself into. He took a few practice swings in between the pews, and realized he may be using the shield more than the sword. He took the shield off his back and held it in front of him, and continued his examination of the church. It was clear the main sanctuary did not have the spring inside it, but assuming the church on the mountain was similar to the church in Alindria, there were separate rooms where the pastor would be preparing for his service, and a room where the church supplies would be held. Following this logic, Tristan found 2 doors to either side of the church and went to the one on the right side. He found the door locked and, saying a quick prayer of repentance, bashed the handle of his sword against the old wooden door to force his way in. The locks were rusted and old, and the wood wasn't very strong. A few bashes with the sword and the door fell off its hinges. Tristan stepped inside to find himself in the sacristy. A few hangers remained in the closet, and an old desk that stood in one corner, along with various old pieces of parchment. There was nothing inside to suggest a spring, but there was a door opening to further behind the church. Tristan tried the door again and found this one unlocked but still hanging. It swung open easily and opened to a hallway in the back of the church. The hallway went around to the back of the main sacristy to the other side, where the door leading to the other room was already open. The hallway opened up in the middle to another intersection, and light shone through the hallway, along with a light dusting of snow. Having no other leads, Tristan followed the hallway and turned where the snow began. There stood a set of double doors leading out to a small stairway that went up to a patio. The patio was covered in a combination of stone and wood that seemed much cleaner and stronger than the rest of the monastery. In the center of this patio stood a small pool of water, surrounded by a wall of stone bricks that went almost up to Tristan's waist, and with a stream of water flowing out of an image of one of the saints holding a bucket of water. The water was clear and calm, and despite no one around to pump the water, the stream flowed almost endlessly out of the bucket of the saint and into the pool. "This must be the spring that Serena mentioned," Tristan said to himself. "It certainly looked quite well preserved. I guess the stories told in the village must be true." Tristan seized his swords and ran towards the spring. He pulled out the glass vials and went to dip one in the spring. The task, while daunting, proved surprisingly easy. He lowered the vial into the water and dipped it into the spring. The water felt cool to the touch and felt wonderful on Tristan's hand as he dipped it into the spring. But the minute the glass touched the water of the spring, it dissolved and passed out of his hand as though it was liquid. Tristan pulled his hand back in a flash and ran to the snow and shoved his hand in a considerable pile, in case it started to do anything to his hand, too. But after a few minutes of sitting there in the snow, Tristan could feel his hand, though it did not appear to be affected by the cold. He pulled it out and inspected it. No, his hand was fine. As a matter of fact, it looked cleaner than the other hand. He did not trust dunking himself in the water entirely, but it certainly wasn't harmful to the touch. He himself would not likely be damaged by the water of the pool. Tristan returned and put his hand in. The water was clear and refreshing and gave him no problems. He put his remaining vial on the stone around the pool and dipped his hands into the water. He cupped his hands and brought out a small amount of water and tried pouring it into the vial by gently tipping it from his hand. That didn't work either. As soon as the water touched the vial given to him by Serena, the glass vial melted down as though by acid and became no different from the water. Tristan had no more vials to carry the water in, and no way to carry the water down to Rosalind. Tristan's good luck had run out. Here ends Chapter 4. Next week, The Knight and the Unicorn, Chapter 5.